Okay, good evening, everybody, or afternoon, or whatever it is. My name is Catherine Hellerstein, and I'm the director of the Jewish Studies program at Penn and a professor of Yiddish and modern Jewish literature, Jewish American literature in the Department of Francophone, Italian, and Germanic Studies. I want to welcome you tonight to the 27th annual Patricia Brown Silvers and David Silvers Visiting Scholar Program, hosted by Penn's Jewish Studies program. And we also have a lot of co-sponsors. Yes, excuse me. I forgot, I left my list of, and microscopic print, but they're very much, not microscopic, but on this beautiful poster that we have for our talk tonight. This has been supported by the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations, by the Department of Spanish, by the Department of French and Francophone, Italian, and Germanic Studies, my home department, by the Global Medieval and Renaissance Studies program, by Religious Studies Department, and by the Department of History. So thank you to all of the co-sponsors for this event. More than a quarter of a century ago, Patty and David Silvers, who are both alumni of Penn, established the Silvers Visiting Scholar Program in order to bring a distinguished scholar in Jewish studies to the Penn campus every year, specifically in order to interact with students, faculty, and the larger community. We are extremely grateful to the Silvers program and the fact that we could bring to Penn scholars whose works is of incredible intellectual caliber and contemporary relevance, and work that has a significant impact upon current intellectual and social interests in the fields of Jewish studies and the larger Jewish community. And tonight, I hope I'm right in this, I'm really glad to be able to welcome on the Zoom portion of this event, Patty and David Silvers, our benefactors for this program. Our speaker tonight, Hélène Jawhara Piñer, brings a special focus on a combination of fields, medieval history and food studies among them. And she was brought to our attention by my wonderful colleague, Heather Sharkey, who's professor of modern Middle Eastern and North African history and the chair of the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations. And she's also a really valued and wonderful member of the Jewish Studies faculty. Because she's teaching a course on food in the Islamic Middle East, history, memory, and identity, I've asked Professor Sharkey to introduce tonight's speaker. Before we get started with Heather's introduction and then with Dr. Jawhara Piñer's speech, I want to explain the format because we are hybrid, as most things are these days. Our guest speaker will speak for, 45 minutes or so, as long as she wants. And then when she finishes, she will be happy, I hope, to entertain questions from the audience. Those who are here in our room, in our beautiful auditorium, can raise a hand and we'll bring a traveling microphone to you. Those who are listening in on Zoom and have questions, you may write your questions in the Q&A function on the webinar, and hopefully I will be able to figure out how to manipulate and manage this very complex technological setup. And I'll be able to read selectively from your questions and then offer our speaker a chance to answer them. So Professor Heather Sharkey, please come be the official introducer.
Good evening, everybody. It's my honor and delight to be able to welcome Hélène Jawhara Piñer here, and I'm really excited about this event. But before introducing her, I would like to thank the Jewish Studies program and the Silvers Family Fund, which not only sponsored this lecture, but which also supported her visit to my class yesterday, a class on food in the Islamic Middle East, where we had a fascinating discussion about the impact and legacies of the Inquisition on culinary cultures in Spain and in the Sephardic diaspora, and on her use of sources which range from manuscripts in Arabic, Catalan, and other languages, and on records from Inquisition tribunals in Spain and Mexico. So I'd like my students to raise their hand and to give a shout out to this class. It's great to see you. And it's great to have Hélène back again. So Hélène Jawhara Piñer holds an undergraduate or a preliminary degree from the Sorbonne in Spanish language teaching. She has master's degrees in Spanish languages and literature from the University of Versailles, which is part of the University of Paris system. And she has a PhD in medieval history from the University of Tours, which hosts the European Institute for the History and Cultures of Food, which goes by the acronym IEHCA. From her PhD dissertation, she wrote 2 books. The first is her cookbook, Sephardi, which appeared in English and Spanish versions in 2021, and I can pass that around as she speaks. And I can say I've made 4 things from it so far. They've come out beautifully, so I can attest to its excellence. And the second book, which forms the basis for tonight's talk, is Jews, Food, and Spain, the oldest medieval Spanish cookbook and the Sephardic culinary heritage. In 2021, the Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies awarded her the David Gitlitz Emerging Scholar Prize for her research into Sephardic culinary history. Hélène Jawhara Piñer teaches in 2 universities, at the University of Tours on medieval food history, and at the University of Bordeaux on medieval religious history. She has published extensively in English, French, and Spanish forums, and in popular and scholarly venues in Europe and North America. Her recent articles have included a study of Sephardic eating practices in Brazil and Mexico from the 16th through 18th centuries, and have also included an exploration of the Sephardic precursors to and possible origins of challah bread. And both of these articles appeared in the International Journal of Sephardic Studies. She has also written on the history of donuts, eggplants, and other ingredients and dishes, and has many things in the works. And while she is a medievalist and a food historian, she is also a chef and has appeared in many online forums. And in fact, I first encountered her during the pandemic, during the lockdown, when one of our Penn colleagues, Arthur Kieran, the Judaica curator in the Penn libraries, alerted me to an online talk and cooking demo that she was going to be giving, recreating a medieval Iberian fried donut for Hanukkah. So she's currently working on 2 new projects, which will not be the basis for tonight's talk, but I wanted to give you a sense of the areas of her investigations. First, she's studying the history of Jewish cheese making, preparing a book on that subject, and she's also writing a cookbook about matzah. She told me yesterday that we may think of matzah nowadays as a dry, square cracker, but that she has found historic Sephardic recipes that sound more like soft flatbreads, akin to South Asian chapatis or paratas. So I'm looking forward to seeing the results of that work, but the bottom line is that Hélène Jawhara Piñer is a dynamo and is producing path-breaking work in food history. We're lucky to have her with us tonight, so please join me in welcoming her to Penn.
Thank you. That's perfect. Thank you. That's wonderful. I think that's the best introduction I have ever had in my life either. So thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank my colleague, Iser Sharkey, for inviting me to talk, to give this lecture from Silver Program. And also, of course, Catherine, thank you so much for inviting me. And thank you so much, Chrissy, for answering all my emails and for scheduling everything. thank you so much to not my students, but other students for coming tonight. I'm so glad that you are here. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone, my friends, and I think future colleagues, to come here and to listen to this lecture. Okay. I think I just have to do this, right?
I'm just going to full screen.
What, can I do this?
Oh, yeah, you got right, I think.
I think, yeah,
I just want to.
okay. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. No.
The study of Jewish recipes from a modern cookbook is not problematic. However, studying them from a medieval cookbook presents a challenge. The relationship between the dominant and the dominated groups, including their food practices, highlight the use of religion as a tool of power and mirror the social and political context of this time. Hence, both the visible and the hidden culinary habits and recipes hold significance. The historical context in Iberian Peninsula during Muslim rule in the 12th century was complex, marked by tension and forced conversions. The Kitab al-Tabikh, a 13th century cookbook written in Arabic, serves as a unique source that sheds light on these complexities. It is the oldest culinary cookbook from Spain and the oldest source to mention explicitly Jewish recipes. The Kitab al-Tabikh stands out for its logical structure and its representation of territorial multiculturalism. The inclusion of Jewish recipes in a cookbook written in an adverse context is therefore surprising. Jewish cuisine is unique in that it integrates religion and cuisine. And it is this relationship between history and identity that the Kitab al-Tabikh reveals through explicitly labeled Jewish recipes. It raises questions about the place of Jews in Al-Andalus cuisine under Almohad rule. Why are there Jewish recipes in this Arabic cookbook? Are these recipes distinct from the others? What about the non-Jewish recipes in the Kitab al-Tabikh? The scope of this lecture is centered on the Jewish recipes within a 13th century Andalusian cookbook in Arabic, the Kitab al-Tabikh, which means kitab in Arabic means the book, and tabikh is the cuisine. During the 12th and 13th century, Spain was dominated by the dogmatic Muslim Almohad dynasty, in the purple color in the map. The rest of the Iberian Peninsula, so in white, was ruled by Christians. This period is of significant interest to the study of the history of Spain and the Jews of Spain for two primary reasons. Firstly, it marks the earliest source referencing explicitly Jewish recipes. Secondly, this era represents a religious shift that culminated in the 14th century with pogrom against Jews in 1491 in all Spain, and had a profound impact on the relationships between Jewish, Muslim, and Christian communities. In exploring the culinary history of the Jews of Spain, it is essential to understand the unique economic and social tensions prevalent in this multicultural context over an extended period. While cookbooks are usually the first source historians consult when studying the food and cuisine of a community, it is vital to note that no written Jewish cookbook from the Middle Ages has been discovered in Hebrew or in any other language. However, the Arabic language was introduced in the Iberian Peninsula in 711 and quickly established itself as the language of knowledge, including among Jews. The late medieval Arabic cookbook, the Kitab al-Tabikh, so the Cookbook, mentions 6 explicitly Jewish recipes, making it the first reference point for the existence of a Jewish cuisine, and so for the study of Jewish food in the late Spanish Middle Ages. Indeed, the question of the meaning of Jewish cuisine needs to be explored. Although the complexity of the subject makes it challenging to analyze the culinary history of the Jews of Spain and the diaspora, it is essential to note that their cuisine was historically significant. Therefore, religion, mainly holiday celebrations, distinguish the cuisines of the different communities in the territory. Despite the rarity of publications about Spanish Jewish cuisine, the clues in the Kitab al-Tabikh reveal scattered traces of Jewish food practices explicitly designated as such. Let's briefly make a point concerning the author. The author is anonymous. The author of the Kitab al-Tabikh is anonymous. It provides an intriguing perspective due to the richness and quality of information contained within the book. Though the identity of the author remains a mystery, it can be concluded that he was familiar with Jewish dietary laws, medicine, and were neither Christian nor Berber. The author includes instructions in some recipes, like to remove the tendon from the meat or to salt the meat before cooking. These steps are not required for Muslims, as their food practices do not mandate them. However, they are significant for Jews, as they align with the Jewish dietary laws. The cookbook provides insight into the eating habits and practices of Jews and Muslims, highlighting how different cuisines can represent and differentiate communities within the same territory. By analyzing the ways in which the author describes the use of bread, wine, meat, and eggplant, it's possible to understand how the food practices of Jews and Muslims were similar or different. The author did not provide any recipes containing pork, but as it is prohibited for both Jewish and Muslim dietary laws, this explains a shared food practice and cannot be used as an evidence to differentiate one custom from another. However, the author did include recipes that call for the use of wine. One not in one recipe suggests that good Muslims who do not consume alcohol can use honey as a substitute. In contrast, Jews were allowed to consume wine. This could mean that there are more recipes than are suitable for Jewish dietary practices beyond the 6 explicitly mentioned. Alternatively, it may imply that some Muslims drank alcohol, and we know that it was the case, although it was noted that King Abu Yusuf Yaqub forbade it. The anonymous author also pays particular attention to various cooking methods, like using new pots or sealing pots, including those for meat, like using salted meat, and bread, like using unleavened bread. as well as diet for different groups, like different pathologies. Finally, he stresses the significance of incorporating particular culinary techniques that provided both dietary benefits and palatable flavor, utilizing ingredients like vinegar, syrups, oil, apple and pomegranate juice, raisin, mustard, spices, and medicinal plants to prepare nutritious dishes. This cookbook, the Kitab al-Tabikh, is very special. Clues contained in it suggest that it was written in the 12th to 13th centuries after the new waves of persecution that began in 1165 during the period of Islam's domination on the Iberian Peninsula under the Almohad Caliphate or immediately after. As I mentioned previously, it is the oldest culinary cookbook from Spain to reach us and the oldest source in the world that refers to explicitly Jewish recipes. But there is also another interesting recipe collection that I would like to highlight very briefly. The second cookbook mentioning one explicitly Jewish recipe has been written 1 century after the 6 explicitly Jewish recipes in the Andalusian cookbook. Indeed, in the myriad Eastern Muslim cookbooks of the Middle Ages, the only one to include a dish explicitly designated as Jewish is what we translated as the description of familiar foods, the Kitab al-Wafs al-Hatimah al-Mutata. It is an anonymous cookbook written in Cairo. The recipe is referred as makabib lanuha al-Yahud, so as meatball cursed by the Jews. So as I explained yesterday to the students, the description of familiar food is the original cookbook, and then this original cookbook is known by 2 copies, and the first copy we have dates back to the 14th century, and in this first copy we can find here. We can find just here the recipe called makabib, so the meatballs la nu'a al-Yahud, so cursed by the Jews. And the second one is in fact just another copy of the original cookbook, but very surprisingly, the term cursed totally disappeared. We don't know, we do not have any reason for this. We cannot explain this, but as the meaning of the word cursed is quite very special. So it could be, I think, even more interesting to develop this point. Let's be back to our Kitab al-Andalusian cookbook. The culinary profile of the Kitab al-Tabikh can be established by analyzing the food contained in its 462 recipes. Yes, it's a lot. It took me almost 2 years. It contains 101 sweet dishes, 55 of which contain honey and 66 sugar, and 26 contain both. These do not contain any meat. There are also 461 savory dishes. Among the latter, there are 2 subcategories. Meat dishes, including 400 recipes, with 50 with poultry, 41 with mutton, and 50 dishes without any meat. And this is very intriguing because if you have a look into the other cookbooks written almost on the same period from the East or from the West, all the recipes contains meat, but this Kitab al-Tabir has a very special part, very special chapter without any meat in the recipes. And this is very special. The later are divided into 90 fish preparations, 4 with eggs, 8 with various ingredients, and 6 including cheese, and 19 with vegetable. The last subcategory is made up of 15 eggplant recipes, and this is also special because other cookbooks that dates back to the same period do not contain a very special chapter on eggplant. So 15 eggplant recipes and 4 others with separately lentils, gourd, chickpeas, and 1 recipe of the gardener's recipe. The food diagram illustrates the predominance of meat, 86%, within the savory dishes of the Kitab al-Tabir, while still including unique vegetarian preparations, 40% of the savory dishes, which is a big part. As 55 of the sweet recipes contain honey, and as honey is included in 69 preparations in the Kitab al-Tabir, we can conclude that honey is almost exclusively for dishes that can anachronistically be considered as dessert or pastries. Sugar is included in a little over 1/4 of meat dishes, but often as a garnish. So in this context, we are going to focus only on the six explicitly Jewish recipes that have been translated as a Jewish dish of chicken, a Jewish dish of chicken, a Jewish dish of partridge, Jewish partridge, a stuffed buried Jewish dish, and a Jewish dish of eggplant stuffed with meat. The significance of the relationship between cuisine and religion in Jewish cuisines warrants further investigations. The Kitab al-Tabir highlights this connection between history and identity through its explicit designation of certain recipes as Jewish. In this context, when I say explicitly Jewish, I refer to recipes that include the word Jewish or Jew as Yehud, the word Yehud, Yehudi, in their titles. However, it would be a mistake to solely focus on a terminological analysis. This table represents English and Spanish translations of the Arabic names of these recipes. The Kitab al-Tabir comprises a pair of recipes for chicken, here recipe number 1 and recipe number 2. One of the recipes necessitates a whole chicken, while the other recipe involves the use of chicken parts. The chicken recipes are titled a Jewish dish of chicken, but uses stuffing, and a Jewish dish, the other one is just a Jewish dish of chicken. There are 2 partridge dishes that you can see here, number 3 and number 4, named Jewish partridge, stuffed, the number 3, and a Jewish dish of partridge. A dish containing ground meat and meatballs is referred to as a stuffed buried Jewish dish. It's here number 5. Lastly, number 6, a recipe with lamb and eggplant is named a Jewish dish of eggplants stuffed with meat. Here, the term lun, so this is the first on the right, okay, means dish, but also way, the way to do the things, are also color in Arabic. The focal point of interest in this context is the use of the terms Yehud or Yehudi, denoting Jewish. There appear to be some errors in the transcriptions of the word Jewish, which may have been accidental. In the first dish, a diacritical mark seems to be missing, as the dot appears to have been omitted. Upon correcting the errors, it is evident that the letter, so the second one, yeah, is used as an adjective to describe the dishes as Jewish. In the case of the second dish, it appears that the transcriber mistakenly duplicated the last letter, resulting in both chicken dishes having, in fact, the same title despite being distinct, because one is stuffed and one is used raw. Let's examine the two partridge recipes. The third, number 3, dish provides clarity regarding the name Jewish partridge. It is worth noting that the term dish, so loon in Arabic, is not used in this instance. In this case, the adjective Jewish in Arabic is feminine and refers directly to the word partridge, implying that the partridge itself is Jewish. That's quite curious. Based on the other recipes, two hypotheses can be formulated. The first possibility is that the adjective Jewish relates to the gender and quantity of the word chicken, partridge in recipes 1, 2, and 3. This suggests that the chicken or partridge used in these recipes was slaughtered according to the Jewish dietary laws of the Shita, rather than indicating that the animals themselves were Jewish. The second hypothesis is that the adjective Jewish corresponds to the gender and quantity of the word dish. This seems more logical. The interpretation is based on the grammatical gender of the words in the recipe, which is a common feature in many languages, including Arabic. In recipe number 4, the gender of the words helps to clarify the meaning of the adjective Jewish and its relationship to the other nouns in the recipe. By analyzing the gender of the words, we can see that the adjective Jewish, Yehudi, which is masculine, is modifying the word dish, loon or color, also masculine, rather than the word partridge, which is feminine. This suggests that the recipe is describing a particular style of cooking or flavoring, rather than a specific ingredient or animal. Overall, this example demonstrates how language and grammar can be used to convey precise meaning and may clarify relationships between words in a text. Altogether, except for recipe number 3, which does not contain the word dish, it can be argued that the adjective Jewish refers to the word dish. Indeed, the name of the recipes number 5 and number 6 leave no doubt about this. The adjective Jewish is placed right after the noun dish, thereby describing it in the most direct way possible. The passage highlights the ambiguity and complexity of the term Jewish in relation to food and cuisine. While the recipes themselves provide some clues about the meaning of the term, there are still different ways to interpret it. On one hand, it may indicate a unique Jewish culinary tradition, distinct from other practices, and here Muslim practices, in the region, and that the author knew about their different food habits. On the other hand, it may reflect the adaptation of a non-Jewish dish by Jewish cooks. It is true that when there is insufficient information or data to make a conclusion, both hypotheses can be considered possible. These possibilities reflect the complex history of Jewish cuisine, which has been shaped by migrations, diaspora, and cultural exchange. Heritage is not static and can be constructed and reconstructed over time. This dynamic aspect of culinary heritage is a key feature of Jewish cuisine, which has evolved and adapted in response of changing social, cultural, and historical contexts. This is one of the essential features of Jewish cuisine. Based on the information provided in the cookbook, it seems that the main ingredients used in these 6 explicitly Jewish recipes are not unique to Jewish cuisine, as they are commonly found in many other recipes. However, it appears that these particular recipes in the Kitab al-Tabikh place a greater emphasis on certain ingredients, such as pine nuts, rosewater, and eggs. It's conceivable that these ingredients were more commonly used in Jewish cuisine during the time of the cookbook was written, or that they were particularly prized or symbolic within Jewish culture. Alternatively, the recipes may reflect the personal preferences of the author or the region where the recipes were developed. However, the emphasis of certain ingredients suggests that these recipes may have a unique flavor profile or cultural significance that distinguishes them from other dishes. Given the information presented, it seems clear that the 2 Jewish chicken recipes are not duplicates, despite their similar titles. The differences in ingredients, cooking method, and proportions suggest that the 2 dishes have distinct flavors and textures. The use of different cooking methods, such as roasting and grilling, can significantly affect the taste and texture of the final dish. Similarly, the use of different ingredients in different proportions can result in a completely different flavor profile. It is also interesting to note that these chicken dishes are similar to a recipe for liver, heart, and chopped entrails served on slices of bread that is still prepared in Sephardic communities today. This suggests that there may be a shared culinary tradition among different Jewish communities. Another noteworthy aspect to consider is that partridge is mentioned in biblical sources. The Torah lists 25 non-kosher types of birds, meaning that all the other ones are kosher. And that is not included, and the partridge is not included in the list of forbidden birds. This may have contributed to its use in Jewish cuisine over the centuries. The fact that the benefits of consuming this bird were recognized by prominent figures such as Al-Arazi or Maimonides may have also contributed to its popularity. The Jewish partridge recipes contained the same proportions of 15 different ingredients. The use of similar items such as citron leaves, mint, pistachios, and pine nuts suggest that there may be a particular flavor profile associated with partridge dishes in Jewish cuisine. It is possible that these ingredients were chosen for their complementarity, flavors, and textures, or for their symbolic significance within Jewish culture. Eggs are a key ingredient in all the 4 recipes, and pine nuts, and almonds are also prominently prominently used. Furthermore, it's worth noting how versatile and important eggs were in these recipes, serving not just as a main ingredient, but also as a decorative element and colorant. It's also intriguing how the use of eggs, along with other ingredients like eggplant and meatballs, and techniques like stuffed dishes or buried dishes, can be considered markers of a Jewish culinary identity that has persisted through time. The use of hard-boiled eggs and other specific ingredients in the 2 Jewish partridge recipes suggests a culinary tradition that has been maintained and evolved over generations. The use of citron and vinegar at different stages of fermentation also indicates the importance of acidity in these dishes. Overall, these ingredients reflect the availability of local produce and the flavor references of the Jewish community at that time. Variations in cooking techniques and styles can be observed, such as the implementation of a pot containing yeast. Of particular interest is the Jewish partridge recipe, which requires the use of a new pot to house the partridge, along with giblets, almonds, pine nuts, cinnamon, and 2 hard-boiled eggs for stuffing. The pot is then sealed with dough for cooking. The culinary technique of sealing a dish, which was used in the preparation of the Jewish partridge recipe and still persists in Jewish cuisine, is significant. The practice aims to maintain the integrity of the dish by ensuring that no further additions are made after the Friday night preparation for Shabbat, until the meal is served the following day. However, it should be noted that the recipe calls for additional ingredients such as vinegar, citron, mint, and eggs, which should potentially be added the next day. Another pot containing burning embers is placed on the top of the dish to brown it, and once the top is golden brown, the pot is rotated to brown the bottom of the dish. The preparation of the Jewish partridge recipe involves the use of multiple pots potentially made of different materials, such as clay and copper, as well as a unique cooking method. This complexity suggests that the dish was not simple to prepare. It is interesting to consider whether the recipe was prepared in accordance with Talmudic law, which mandates the use of a new pot that has not been used before, such as for Pesach or Passover. Similarly, it is worth exploring whether the second partridge recipe is also connected to this religious tradition, but this time for Shabbat. The recipe's religious underpinnings are evident, but it is plausible that the use of a new pot was not only dedicated by religious law, but also by porous nature of clay pots. Using a new pot could prevent flavor such as burnt or smoked or fish from mixing during cooking. Additionally, the taste of clay that clay pots impart to the dish may have also influenced the decision to use new pots, as it would complement the flavor of the dish. The fifth recipe, known as the stuffed buried Jewish dish, I recreated, in fact, myself this dish here. So the fifth recipe, known as the stuffed buried Jewish dish, prominently features eggs, similar to the previous recipes discussed. In addition, rose water is mentioned twice as a fragrant ingredient, and pine nuts are added towards the end of the preparation, consistent with the Jewish partridge recipes. While the recipe does not specify the type of meat to be used, it is reasonable to assume that mutton could be the most appropriate choice given the meats typically used in the recipe collection. The resulting dish is a multi-layered meat cake that has been stuffed and buried. It's delicious. I promise. Upon close examination, the recipe of a Jewish dish of eggplant stuffed with meat is found to be the most labor-intensive and challenging recipe among the 6 explicitly Jewish recipes presented. The recipe employs a diverse range of uses for eggs. While the egg whites are used as a binding agent, the hard-boiled egg yolks are cut into pieces and used for decorative purpose. The recipe also involves a substantial number of ingredients and requires the use of 3 separated cooking pots, presumably to prevent any mixing of flavors. As in the previous recipes, pine nuts and rose water are included, and the addition of acidic liquids at various stages of the preparation and in significant quantities is particularly noteworthy. The utilization of pots is another distinctive feature of these 6 recipes, as 4 of them require the use of at least 2 different pots, which is not commonly seen in the other recipes of the Kitab al-Tabigh. Additionally, 2 of these recipes specify the use of a new pot. Given that individuals of the same social class in Andalusia had an access to similar ingredients, there is little differences between the Jewish dishes and other recipes mentioned in the book. The unique and identifiable aspects of the Jewish dishes lie more in their particular cooking techniques and methods and special acid flavors like citron or vinegar. Those are the photos of the explicitly Jewish recipes. So you can see that they really look totally different. And we can see the importance of the eggs in almost all the recipes, because here it's a layer, but it's like an omelette. So in fact, the recipe uses also eggs. And I think there are eggs in the stuffing of a Jewish dish of chicken. So this is quite interesting. There is another recipe, there are other recipes in this cookbook that highlight the importance of the use of eggs, and particularly when one can read that at the end, when the dish is just you finish to prepare the dish, you put the dish in the dish in the plate, and just before serving the dish, you have to take hard-boiled eggs, the yolk, in fact, and you have to take only the hard yolk, and you cut it into half, and you put the yolks like if it was a star. So this is quite interesting. Not a square, a star. Let's talk about something I really love, and that deal with the hidden Jewish recipes. What means for me, the hidden Jewish recipes? So this refers to recipes that are that were made by Jews, but in fact the word Jewish, Jew or Yehudi is not mentioned in the title of the recipe. The presence of the other Jewish recipes in the cookbook, not explicitly labeled as such, suggests a more complex understanding of the intermingling of cultures and cuisines and in Andalusia. The author of the cookbook may have been aware of the specificities of Jewish cooking practices and references to ancestral traditions, but did not always feel the need to distinguish them as separate from the broader culinary traditions of the rulers. It is also possible that the inclusion of Jewish recipes in the cookbook served a larger cultural and political purpose, such as recognizing the contributions of a new ruling dynasty, the Almohads, or distinguishing it from previous dynasties. Given Oh, I don't have the end of my talk. That's good, interesting. I'm not gonna read, so I'm sorry. I don't know why I do not have the end of my talk. In the part of the hidden Jewish recipes, what is interesting to highlight is that you have the 6 explicitly Jewish recipes, but in fact, you can find just all around the 6 explicitly Jewish recipes, other recipes that do not contain the word Jewish in the title. And which is quite interesting, is the making of cooled chicken. This is a recipe that is just after the second one. It contains stuffing, almonds, and hard-boiled eggs hidden inside as a stuffing. Another interesting recipe is the recipe of stuffed goose. We all know that the goose is still part of Jewish culinary tradition. And in this cookbook of the Kitab al-Tabikh, this is the only recipe to contain goose. And this recipe of stuffed goose, in fact, is just after the 5th recipe of the 5th explicitly Jewish recipe. It contains meatballs, almonds, pine nuts, pistachio, and 25 eggs. This is one of this is the recipes that contains the larger quantity of eggs. So you have the fact that this recipe used goose is quite interesting. The fact that the recipe is stuffed is also very interesting. And the fact that this recipe contains a large amount of eggs, you have here 3 of the main foods that can represent Jewish food practices. Here, this is one of the discovery of my investigation of the Kitab al-Tabikh. Why? Because in fact, if you have a look into the cookbook, this recipe is labeled as the murakaba. So that means a composed, okay? So this recipe is quite interesting. The ingredients are not interesting at all because this recipe only uses flour, a little bit of yeast, water, salt, and flour, semolina. So it's like a regular recipe. So when at the first time, it did not pay attention to me. It was like a regular recipe. But in fact, the interest of this recipe lie in fact in the process to make the recipe. Why? Because nowadays, in short, this recipe is exactly the same recipe as the recipes that the Sephardim, mainly from Morocco, but also from the Moroccans that are living in Israel nowadays, they still prepare exactly this recipe, which is called the mufleta. The mufleta is in fact layers of dough that you have to you cook one layer, and then you have to take another one and you just put it over, and then once it's cooked, you have to take both and just flip them, and you put another one and you flip the 3, you put another one and you flip the 4. So at the end it's like a tower, and then you have to pour melted butter over and honey. It's delicious. Why this recipe is super interesting? Because of course, only the Sephardim from Morocco prepares this recipe. And this recipe is not mentioned is not labeled as a Jewish recipe. But in fact, the Muslims do not do this recipe. It's not part of the Moroccan traditional culinary heritage. Only the Jews prepared and still prepare nowadays this recipe only for the Mimuna. The Mimuna is at the end of Passover, when there is a celebration of the end of Passover. And this recipe is found in the Kitab al-Tabir. And this proves how transmission happened. So this is, for me, it was just so crazy. Those are recipes that are mentioned in the Kitab al-Tabir cookbook, and that are also part nowadays of the Sephardic culinary heritage. They are hidden recipes. They are not mentioned, not labeled as Jewish recipes of the 13th century. But nowadays, you can find those recipes in the Sephardic culinary heritage. But for some recipes, Muslims also, there is a shared culinary heritage with Muslims. For example, in the Kitab al-Tabir, you can find 3 recipes of couscous, but the first one only deal with the preparation of the semolina. The couscous was prepared by Muslims, and the Inquisition used, in fact, the consumption of couscous by Muslims as a way to identify them. But we also know that couscous were also prepared by the Sephardic, by the Jews of Spain, and then by the Sephardim. And the couscous practice was, in fact, traveled with the Sephardim when they settled, for example, in Italy, and in Sicily and in Italy. On the top, you have a preparation of isfenj. The term isfenj or sfenj, it depends, is also a preparation in the Kitab al-Tabir nowadays. Sfenj, you can find sfenj everywhere in Morocco, everywhere. It's a street food, okay? But for Hanukkah, Jews used to prepare sfenj nowadays. So it's a shared culinary heritage, but the difference is, in fact, the celebration of the holidays. Sambusak, it's like in Spain, we have the empanadillas, the stuffed pastries are very common among the culinary practices of the Sephardim. You have, in the Kitab al-Tabir of the 13th century, you have a recipe that is a chickpea croquette recipes, which really look like to falafel. And the last one, this one, the muhlabiya, is also a dish, a dessert, okay, that you can find everywhere in the Middle East. But in the 13th century, it was also this recipe was also written in the Andalusian cookbook. I think I've done. So, yeah. So, I'm gonna make a conclusion. Okay. So, during my PhD, I just spent like 6 years investigating on the Kitab al-Tabir recipes, so 462 recipes. I spent just two years only on this source, and then I have to investigate on other sources because when it's time to, when one wants to understand Jewish history and even more the culinary history of the Jews, we cannot use only one kind of source. It's very, very important to first to do it on the long time. It's very important because if you just focus on 1 century or 2 centuries, this makes no sense. Because if you do this, so you do not take into account the diaspora, and this would be a big mistake. And the other thing that which is very important when you in time to understand Jewish history and Jewish food history is the diversity of the sources. You have to study different kinds of sources, literature, I don't know, literature or dictionaries or different kinds of sources, because you have to understand that it's like different layers of history, and you cannot just focus on one layer. You have just to take it and to look what you are going to discover on the top, but also on the bottom. So it's complex, but it's really fascinating. Thank you.
Stay up here, please. Let me see if I can remember. Stop share. Okay.
Yes.
So here we are. Okay. I don't know how to do this except. Okay. So, oh dear. All right. One moment. I'm just going to read. Let me start with an online question, just because there's 2 of them. Adam Cohen asks, could you tell us something about the manuscript of the Kitab al-Tabith? Okay, it seems like a luxurious product. For whom was it written? Where do we know the scribe? How big is it? Thank you. Okay.
Okay. So the manuscripts, I think I told you quite, I gave several informations. The Kitab al-Tabith is the first cookbook of the Iberian Peninsula. It has been written in the 13th century. It's anonymous, and it has been written under Muslim domination and the rise of the dogmatic domination of the Berbers, of the Almohads. It is known by 2 copies. One dates back to the 17th century, and one dates back earlier. Yes, I think. Yes. And what is interesting is that in both copies of the Kitab al-Tabith, we never have the first page, the first sheet, and so obviously it looked like it was obvious. So someone just, we do not know the author because nobody wanted in fact, nobody wanted to highlight who was the author of the Kitab al-Tabith. It's big, yes, it's like 400 recipes, 462 recipes. I say recipes of dishes because, in fact, at the end of the cookbook, you can find preparations that are in relation with the preparation of soap or perfumes, but only 462 that concern dishes.
I think what he's asking is, well, who was the audience?
Who is the audience?
Yeah, who was it made for? Was it made for a housewife or?
As a professional cook, well, first of all, there don't seem to be quantity recipes. They seem to be individual. It doesn't seem like they're for a wedding. They seem like they're for an individual. But a professional cook may not know how to read and would know because he's been learning it from somebody else. And well, I had another question, but
in fact, the cookbooks, as many other kinds of sources like this one, were written for the the elite of the society. So sometimes we can find information concerning for who the source was written. For example, in the Regimen of Health of Maimonides, which dates back to the 12th century, it's obvious at the beginning, Maimonides writes that this Regimen of Health has been written for the son of the king in Egypt, and because he was sick. So it's because the king asked this that he decided to write. But here it's not the question, it's not written. I think that it was only a cookbook. So we do not know for who the cookbook was written, but we know that it's always for the elite of the society.
And I think the question also asks, if I may, what was the size of it? Not just how many
Si-
recipes, but is it the
okay.
size of a 11
It's
by 8?
smaller.
Oh, it's smaller.
Yes,
Okay.
in its size, it's larger, but the sheets, the folios
Yes,
are
the
not too big.
Okay.
Yes.
Interesting. And they're written on parchment?
They're written on parchment.
Yeah.
Yes, with several colors, but mainly black and sometimes red.
And no illustrations, right?
No illustrations.
Yeah.
I can. Oh yes.
Okay.
Quick question. How did you come across that book? Did you find it?
It
Was it
is
buried somewhere?
at the National Library of Paris. So it's there, but I did not have access to the manuscript. I had access only to the microfilm on the manuscript, and then I worked on a work, on a PhD, on a thesis that a woman did. She just translated in her PhD. She wrote in French and she just transcribed she rewrote in Arabic, but there are a lot of mistakes. But her work is good, and she is the first that she did this, so that's interesting. There is also a Spanish translation of this cookbook, and which is also interesting, but it has been done in 1965 and contains a lot of mistakes. So, like, for example, what was recurrent is a mistake between honey and yeast. I don't know why it's sometimes, yes.
It's a big mistake.
A super big difference. So in part of my PhD, it's not nice for the woman, but in part of my PhD, I had to make a list of all the mistakes because this changed, in fact, the final result in time of just analyzing the food that were used in this cookbook. See, of course, if you just write that there is 14 recipes with honey, and in fact there is like 100, it's totally different.
Quick question. The hidden Jewish recipes, how did you identify them as Jewish rather than non-Jewish in the book?
Interesting. As I told just before, at the beginning, at the first time when I read the cookbook at the first time, I did not get this. It's in fact when you know more and more concerning the different kinds of Jewish food celebration that you nowadays, that you can just understand that you have to go deeper in certain recipes. In fact, it's more the process. The stuffed dishes, the dishes that use a lot of eggs, and the dishes that use a lot of citron leaf, or the term citron, in fact, it's etrog. So of course, it's not like a mere food, you know. So when you know about
explain that, some people might not know what an etrog is.
Yes, the etrog is one of the fruit of the lulav to celebrate Sukkot. Yeah, so it's important because for the Jewish tradition, what we have to keep in mind is that the lemon existed in Spain, but lemon and etrog are totally different because the etrog bears a symbolical value in Jewish tradition, a very, very important value in Jewish tradition. So of course the taste is a bit different, but I think that if in this recipe the food that was used was etrog and not lemon, there is a reason. So that's all.
There was another question online I saw. Somebody asked, how do you do the buried? What exactly does it mean, buried in the recipes, and how does one do it? I guess we're gonna all go home
Yes.
and make buried
In fact,
dishes.
Yes, bird dishes. In fact, for example, one of the 6 explicitly Jewish recipes, I cannot, yes, I'm just going to check something. Can you see or?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if well, it's okay, just do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's here. Okay. So if you have a look to the recipe number 5, it's Lun Yehudi Mashu Matfun. So this means that and this is a very interesting recipe. Buried, that means that when it was covered and the dish was hidden, so it could be buried because we cannot know what was inside, but it could be buried also because it could have been prepared just in a hole in the ground and covered. So, and this is in this one.
Wow.
So you understand. So it's in fact you cannot say this recipe. This dish is very interesting and it's very delicious. You just have to make omelets, and you put one in a large skillet, and you prepare the meatballs, and you just have to make layers. And the last time you cover with a large omelet, and you cover everything so it's buried. And then at the last time when everything is cooked, you just have to flip it, and it's like a big cake.
Oh my God. Can we come for dinner?
Oh yeah, my pleasure. When I live here in Philly, you're welcome. You're welcome in France. That's no problem. Yes.
Is there any thank you. Is there any evidence from within the cookbook that the author may have been Muslim? Because you say we know the author is not Christian or Berber, and
Yes.
the author clearly had a familiarity with Jewish practices. But is there evidence that the author knew a lot about Ramadan customs or Muslim holidays or other things?
Oh, that's a good question. In fact, if we consider that the cookbook has been written under quite dogmatic Muslim domination, so we should have found in the cookbook references to Muslim holidays like Ramadan, for example, because Ramadan is one of the most important celebration, but there is no references. Wow. Nothing.
Oh, interesting.
So that's super interesting. Yeah.
So how do we know that there was one author? Maybe one person collected recipes from many households.
Yes.
Is there a consistency in how they explain the recipes? And
You're totally right. In fact, several scholars just started to make investigations on this cookbook, and some of them think that in fact, as it was usual in this time and for cookbooks, it's like a compilation of what different author wrote, and then in fact, lastly, it's like a cookbook. One can think that there are different authors, but there is a real consistency in all the recipes. And for example, if you just remind the 6 explicitly Jewish recipes, if it was only a compilation, why those explicitly Jewish recipes appeared like one after another. So this is quite intriguing. And the chapters are very well organized. So it could be, but also if we have a look to the type of writing, it's the same hand. So I think it's one author, but that's the situation of the author is very complex. So, but that's a good question.
So when a recipe is written down, it freezes like how you make it. And just like when a prayer book was written down, it can freeze how people did something. And I'm wondering if it influenced, because it was written down, how it was done, and then what ingredients you used, or the availability of ingredients.
The availability, I mean, can you reword either? Yes.
Availability.
Yes.
Well, it's like if it because the recipe was written down, it influenced what people ate. It wasn't
Yes.
just a reflection of what they ate at the time, but
Mhm.
then in the future. So
Yes.
it's like, oh, we need for Mamuna
Mhm.
etrogim,
Huh.
whatever. So I'm just wondering if it influenced, because it was written down, future generations of what they ate.
I think, of course, in fact, all the things that are written have an influence on the future. But when you talk about Jewish people, you have to consider the diaspora. So even if the Jews have prepared those kinds of recipes, when they moved and they settled in other countries, so even if it was the same recipe, the recipe could have changed, because when they didn't, maybe they could not find the same food and they have to adapt. But what is interesting is that something never changed. Is what never changed, in fact, is the food that have been prepared to celebrate the Jewish holidays. And this, in fact, quite never changed. For example, the mufleta, in fact, the recipient process is still the same. And you have another recipes like the hojuelas. They are very easy recipes and they are still the same. But when it's time, when we talk about like recipe for every day, it's possible that the recipe just moved and changed the ingredients. But the Jewish celebrations make that there is very few changes, in fact, in the recipes.
One more question. Just one. This is actually more of a comment, because I've had the pleasure of reading the book Jews, Food in Spain, and if you read it, I just want to say one really interesting idea that I'm still thinking about from the book is the idea that Hélène raises about the notion of culinary ideology.
See,
That's a
yes.
phrase you use. I've never seen anybody use that before, and so there's the question about what were the ideologies of the cookbook author here, and then you've also talked in the introduction about later cookbooks under Christian rule in northern Spain and the ideological shifts, and therefore how the Jewish recipes might fit into that. So I just want to just point out that's one fascinating idea as well that comes out in the book that is really.
Of course, as it was
amazing.
not the topic, because today we only have to focus on the Jewish recipes, we could not have talked about this, but of course it's super interesting. The fact that my opinion is food has been used as a tool for the power, in fact, for the Muslims, yes, but only a little, but for the Christians, totally. During my doctorate, I had to read 11 cookbooks written under Christian dominations. And the cookbooks written under Christian domination since the end of the 15th century to the 17th century highlight a cuisine which is totally different from the cuisine prepared under Muslim dominations. Even if the context was very complex for Jews during since the 12th century until the 15th century with the Christian rulers, but the cuisine was totally different. And if I did not analyze investigated the 11 cookbooks written in under Christian domination, I would not have understand how food has been used as a tool for the Christians to identify, denounce, and in fact impose a unicity in the food of Spain. Because if we have a look nowadays to what is Spanish food, Spanish food has been Spanish food is only is the food since the 15th century. But it is not that, in fact. But Spanish food nowadays is a lot of pork, a lot of lard, and in fact it is the reflect of what we can find into the cookbooks written under Christian domination since the 15th century. And Christian politics totally erased what was the culinary heritage of Spain before the 15th century. And they used food as a tool for the power. For eggplants, for olive oil, for garlic, for mainly, and for several dishes.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. I don't know if there were more
Thank
questions
you.
online, but there's another question in the room.
I actually wanted to ask you about that, but focusing more on the earlier period under Christian domination. Of course, I totally agree with you that after the 15th and 16th century, food changed. Like you very well explained. Of course, they tried to change it, but in Andalusia, we resisted. We still have lots of similar dishes, maybe also because of the proximity to Morocco. But I wanted to ask you specifically about medieval cookbooks under Christian domination earlier, like 13th century, 14th century, considering that especially, I know more about the Castilian realm than the Aragonese, but considering there were some kings that actually felt a lot of respect and admiration for the Jewish traditions and for the Muslim traditions, thinking of Alphonse the Wise, Alphonse the Tenth's name, or Peter I. Do we have, considering also that they made a great effort to finance translation studies, groups of intellectuals that would try to rescue all these older traditions. Have you found any cookbooks, any hidden recipes in Christian cookbooks from those?
We have talked about this yesterday with the students. In fact, the first cookbook written under Christian domination is the cookbook called the Saint-Sauvy, and it has been written in 1324. And it has been written under Christian domination, as Barcelona was under Christian domination since the beginning of the 9th century. And this cookbook of the Saint-Sauvy is also an anonymous cookbook, and it contains the first time 72 recipes. And the cuisine, so this cookbook has been written like 1 century after the first cookbook written under Andalusian cookbook. And the cuisine, the recipes, the food that are in the Saint-Sauvy, which is written in Catalan, is totally different from the recipes contained in the Arabic cookbooks. So we know that it's really like when the Christians came and to the country, they really wanted to make them even more powerful. And of course, food was in fact the best tool, because food is something that when you eat like one, 2 or 3 times a day. So when you use food, food is very interesting, and we can easily understand why it has been used in Inquisition trials since 1478 in Spain. So I did not find any other translations, but we can say that, yes, since the beginning of the 14th century under Christian domination, and then in Castilla, it was the first cookbook written in 1499, and then the first translation in Castilian in 1529. The cuisine the cuisine in these cookbooks are totally different. Nothing to do with the rest.
Thank you.
No pressure.
So,
One more quick question.
one more question? Is there any more?
What was the meaning of the cursed meatballs? But
We-
cursed.
We don't know. In fact, I have been. I'm not the only one that have been investigating on the meaning of the word cursed.
How is it in Arabic?
Lanuha, it's Lanuha al Yahud. It's here. It's written. It's here. Maccabib, here. Lanuha al Yahud. And in the second one, the word Maccabib actually is not the word used for the term meatballs. Mainly in Spanish, it's albunduc. But, and the other one here, I do not remember exactly where it is. It's here. And the word cursed, we don't know. Why cursed? Because the recipes are, the only difference between the two recipes is that the recipe of the cursed meatball contains lamb, and the recipe with just meatballs of the Jews, not meatball cursed by the Jews, contains lean meat, so it could be partridge or chicken, but it is in fact the only difference. And we really do not know why, in fact, this word has been used. But I think one of the more important point to highlight is that this reveals by the meaning of the word cursed that the situation was very special in Egypt in the 14th century. Why cursed?
So I was thinking if maybe they are cursed because of the lamb, because
Yes.
Agnus Dei, right? Lamb of God is Christ.
At this time, the Muslims were ruling the country. So at the first time, I thought that it was because the meatballs were cursed by the Jews, because the Jews were forced to make those meatballs without removing the tendon of the meat. I think it could be an idea, an hypothesis, but I think that in the recipe, it's written that you have to remove the tendon of the meat, and it's clearly written. So I think it's one of the reasons, but I ask other scholars that are specialists on Middle Eastern cookbooks written in Arabic, and nobody has the answer.
So maybe it wasn't kosher, 100% kosher
Yes,
until you
that's
move
why,
the
really,
remove the tendon.
I really think it's in relation with this.
Well, thank you very much. This was fascinating, and we've
Thank
all
you.
worked up an appetite for whatever comes next.
Thank you so much.
A glorious talk.
Thank you.
And thank you, audience, for coming.
Yeah.